welcome viewers and listeners to another edition of Globespan 24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with our techie support this evening, Mr. Devin Bisram, as usual. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are discussing current issues. Well, rather than say what the current issues are, I'll ask our guests to talk about some of the current issues, and I have a few of my own. I am Vishnu Bisram, the moderator for tonight. So with us tonight is Senior Counsel Mr. Timothy Jonas, who is also the chairperson of ANUG, a new and united Guyana political party, and Mr. Ravi Dev, a lawyer in Guyana, former lawyer in New York, probably still is a lawyer in New York as well, former member of parliament of Rower. And expected to join us very shortly is Mr. Shuman, Lenox Shuman, who is the leader of the Liberty and Justice Party in Guyana. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again, for taking time off a very, very busy schedule to discuss current issues in Guyana. So I want to begin by let you watch a brief clipping from one Mr. Rickford Burke of Brooklyn, New York.
When the PPP does these things like they've done to Winston Jordan, there must be serious consequences. I don't care what it is. There must be serious consequences. They must understand that they're not the only bad people and gangsters in the country. The PPP must understand that. So until somebody can run off the road or something to compensate for the things that they're doing, they're going to keep doing it. And I'm not afraid to say, this is the time when we have to challenge them back. They have.
But I ain't afraid to say neither. Who vex?
So, gentlemen, I mean, you have watched this tape, I hope. The PPP is a bunch of gangsters, and people should be run off the road, whatever that means. What's your reaction, Timothy? I mean, you're a practicing lawyer in Guyana, and so is Ravi Dev. Well,
no, I'm not. Let's just correct that. I am not.
You're not a practicing lawyer.
A lawyer in Guyana.
Okay.
Well, go ahead,
so,
Timothy.
All right, go ahead. Mr. Timothy Jonas, since you are a practicing lawyer in Guyana, what's your view? What's your reaction of that kind of a statement?
Well, there's no doubt it's insightful, and there's no doubt that those two characters contribute to polarization of the two groups in Guyana. They are not alone, they're not the only ones, and the damage isn't done by one side only, but they are two of the more crass, vulgar examples of that sad process. What's interesting about that is that they sit down there in their suits and their ties, and they're all polished and clean shaven and comfortable in their air-conditioned offices. And they are pushing the more radical elements to the front line. Send Uriah to the forefront of the battle that he may be killed. And that's what you see them doing. That is the most cowardly, disgraceful way to show leadership that I've seen. But we're seeing it. And fortunately, the leadership is in such disarray, both by the example that has been set and by the obvious instances of dishonesty, that the support base is not confident in their leadership. Because if this was the leadership that we had in Guyana, and if the support base was confident in that kind of leadership, we'd be in all kinds of problems. But fortunately, they've shown that they're paper tigers. They make a lot of noise, but there's nothing behind it. They're pen pushers pretending to be soldiers. So they can stay where they are. They have become less and less relevant as time goes on.
But you said the PPP is a bunch of gangsters. The government is a bunch of gangsters. So you subscribe to that kind of language to refer to government or opposition?
Well, of course not, and that's what I'm saying. The thing is that you often have a situation where you have leaders trying to use colloquial language so as to connect with their followers, not even realizing that by doing so, they themselves are being condescending and aloof. But the fact is that there is dishonesty on both sides, there's corruption on both sides, there's poor leadership on both sides. And having come out on the losing end on this occasion, these folk, Burke and company, feel aggrieved and therefore are trying to incite, because that is what is there. That's the only card left up the sleeve in their view. They're wrong about that. All they need to do is calmly and rationally, showing good leadership, point out the many failings that are taking place already in the PPP leadership. But they're not doing that. And that's another sad aspect of our politics in Guyana.
Mr. Dev?
Well, I want to put what we just saw Burke and Duncan spoke about in a broader context. Politics from the very beginning has always been intertwined with the media. Politics, to a great extent, is communication. Politics is about power, but to attain power, we have devised this method called democracy, where you have to convince people out there to vote for you, to support you. And this is where the media came in from the very beginning of politics as we know it, away from the monarchy. So the media has been intertwined, but for the longest while, the media, in doing its job, that's how it's got its name, it mediated what the were saying to the people. That was the function they performed. They became very powerful. They became gatekeepers to a certain extent of what the people heard, so that politicians can convince those people to vote for them to come back, because that's the essence of political logic, to get people to vote for you. What we are now seeing is a whole quantum leap in media development. This whole thing that we are seeing called social media, where you don't have the need for any amount of investment that the original media had, radio, television, newspapers, which implied ownership. David de Caires had to own that press. He came from a certain background. He had some kind of consideration as to what kind of society, how it could impact. This social media, and this is the context I want to develop with. In fact, it's now being called mediatization. That politics in itself is going to undergo this quantum leap, and through this mediatization, because through social media, as you can see, here is this guy Burke sitting somewhere in Canarsie in Brooklyn or Flatbush or wherever he hangs out, talking with somebody in Guyana, Sheriff Duncan, purporting to speak on behalf of supporters of the PNC, who are predominantly African Guyanese, and they use the kind of language that is definitely, at a minimum, inflammatory, insightful, not in terms of having any insight, but just trying to incite these people. So this is a development. I want to say that Guyana and all other countries will have to look at very carefully, because politics itself will be changed. These people are talking to now a directed audience. The old media used to try to appeal to everyone in a country. And in that sense, you try to strike some happy medium. There were some who may be one side or the other side, but by and large, they still try to strike a medium. So Burke, in the kind of language there, is not just doing an individual thing. He's now playing with this new form of communication and speaking within an echo chamber. The people who will listen to him, the people who they know will listen to him, are expecting that kind of language. And that's my first comment. I want to speak about that before getting to the substance of what was said.
Mr. Jonas said that instead of appealing to the voters, the electorate, the population, with rational conversation, you have this kind of very coarse, divisive kind of language. Do you think the PNC leadership could appeal and win support?
But this is what I say. You see, media logic is different from political logic. In communication, we talk of media logic versus political logic. Political logic, you try to appeal to the broadest, and you talk of democratic politics, the broadest, sections out there that you would want to vote for you to put you over 50%. Media logic, you simply, wants to push that particular media and sell that media. It's a different kind of logic, especially with social media. Burke is not trying to appeal to all Guyanese. He has no inclination to do so. It's just a matter of they will throw in one or two words, but they know who they are speaking to. They know why they are speaking to them, and you can see the kind of incitement that is going on here. Now, we had this before. You have seen the president of the United States, Donald Trump, use social media. He was the first one at that level to use Twitter to go directly to the people, to speak to them directly without mediation of the media. You had one major media, Fox News, who would accommodate him, but it wasn't enough. So he went directly. So what I'm positing here, this is a new way of politics that is intertwined with a new form of media, and we should expect this to a great and larger extent, even in the developed countries. We saw it with Mr. Trump, and here you're seeing it to the nth degree, and it's going to only get worse. Now, I think, and I'm hoping we're going to get to discussing the attempt to deal with. We had a cybercrime law, and hopefully, and which Burke, there was a wanted, notice sent out on him. But to come back to it, I think this kind of language, this kind of trying to reach out and talking within an echo chamber is going to increase, and we're going to see this will be a demonstrator effect. And I see Guyana has there's a great danger of politics in Guyana fissioning, not necessarily at the major party level, equals, but you'll have elements within the two major party groups going along with this. I can see that from within the PPP camp, you may have some individuals who will be taking this route and using this kind of language. I can see this development. It's very dangerous.
I'm interested that Ravi Dev said that. I agree with him. And there's a point that you made, Vishnu, that I want to disagree with. You see, you treated Burke and
Duncan.
As APNU leadership, and they're not. Duncan's an AFC man, and Burke has very little credence anywhere outside of the one block area where he may reside. So you're looking at noisemakers, but I would be cautious against attributing what they're saying to an APNU position. APNU, much like the PPP, will never be foolish enough to take that kind of line politically. And I think it is a mistake, and I think it misrepresents to try to suggest that these two are speaking for APNU. Now, I agree with Ravi that neither of the two parties at the top echelon will spout the kind of rhetoric that we heard from those two individuals, because that exposes the ugliness of what our political reality is. But the truth is that both parties are race-based. But where you see that manifesting is at the mid-level. It's at the people who are hired at the mid-level management, who you go in and you interface with at the MMA or at the Rice Board or at the Central Housing, applying for your house lot, or in the NIS. It is at the level where you are looking for a piece of government land, or you are looking to be awarded a contract, or you are putting in a bid, or you are asking for a job. It is that mid-level management where you encounter the more raw, ugly side of what our race politics is, and the exclusionary politics, which we all know exists in Guyana, whichever side is in politics, whichever side is in power. So I think we got to be careful to distinguish what an official party line is from the reality of the implementation of exclusion, recognizing that both sides only represent their own constituency. Neither side represents the country.
But if we want to pick up from what Timothy just said, this is where the danger lies, that these guys like Burke and others, this is nothing new. Even before social media, ethnic politics has had these sorts from the beginning, after World War II, when democratization was introduced and individuals had to mobilize. It was something new in the developing countries. And they mobilized along all kinds of ascriptive basis, religion in Northern Ireland, ethnicity here, race in Guyana, you may have in Rwanda or Burundi or South Africa, ethnic groups or tribes. The point is, though, that the danger comes from what you call flank operators. People from within the various elements, whether religious elements, whether the IRA would rise up to be extreme from the Protestants, or whether you have the Ulstermen, and within our group, you call them flank operators. And the danger is they know what they are doing. They are deliberately pushing the major players in a particular direction to the extreme ends, because all ethnic parties, the dynamic, the logic of aggregating votes in any society, you will have two, possibly more, but they invariably end up with two actors. So these flank operators work very assiduously to push the group out of which they arise into a particular direction to get more extreme. And this is where the danger lies. So you have a Roysdale Ford, who is one of the younger leaders coming up of a PNC, and I'm going to get into this APNU fig leaf. We're talking of the PNC here, and who was then castigated for saying that he would not go along with tribal politics. He was castigated. So you have a wide swath of individuals from within the PNC who then were warned that that is your job. You're an ethnic party, and therefore you have to be concerned about the tribe. And even Roysdale Ford had to then address that. So what Burke is doing, Burke represents that extreme flank group that is trying to push the PNC in that direction. This is where the danger arises, because the PNC, it is at a critical moment. Once again, it is trying to reinvent itself to survive. They have gone through 3 or 4 times. You had Burnham, you had then Mr. Hoyt, you then had Corbyn bringing in Granger. Now you have another attempt. So this is a danger. What will this new PNC be like? What position will they take? Will they be looking for a Guyana interest, or a particular section of Guyana only? And that is where the danger comes from. It is not fortuitous of what is going on.
I think Ravi's memory or account of what happened with Roysdale Ford is not entirely accurate. He did indeed say that tribal politics should be rejected and that he himself does not agree with it. But I don't agree that the response from anybody was to say we should have tribal politics. Nobody would say that. They'd be a fool to say that. What the response was to say to him that nobody has claimed that we are following tribal politics. Both parties claim that they are the party for all Guyanese. Both parties say that. And there is not a single politician on either side who will say out loud what the truth is. And the truth is that neither party is a party for all Guyanese.
But Timothy, the person who Roger Ford was addressing his remarks to Aubrey Norton, said very clearly that the major support group of the People's National Congress are African Guyanese, and that the PNC cannot in any way, shape, or form back away from addressing the concerns of that particular constituency, because that is their constituency. And that is a great concession for the person who is seen as the front runner in this PNC race. Nobody's going to be daft enough, apart from possibly Burke, to use the word tribal. I mean, that's just, dog whistling. But they will use these other terms about their constituency, about their support base and all that. So what we are seeing here is that we're becoming much, in a sense, much more direct because of the efforts of these new people on social media, because they are able to bring out the hardcore people who are the ones who will protest, people who will go into the streets, people who will write letters. They will be the new Chatterati. And as to how effective they will be, we will see. But in terms of the politics for the next 4 years, I see those people will continue to push the PNC in a particular direction. The PPP, of course, there are people who will also want that, but the PPP is in office, and let us see how their policies will play out. But their policies will be particular direction, everything they do, whether it is giving out vaccines, whether it is giving out relief to people with the flood, whether it is giving out school children, it will be critiqued from one particular angle, and that will be beaten and beaten and beaten in, which will be more and more divisive.
Okay, let's hear Timothy.
Well,
I want to discuss something else.
I absolutely agree with you that what Aubrey Norton said is that these are our constituencies, our constituency which is being harmed by the PPP policies. But where I think we are maybe parting company, although I'm not sure, is what I'm saying is that this spiel, this line, is adopted by both sides. The two sides are identical, and I'll give you the corollary. When APNU closed down Gaisuko, the PPP said very strongly that this poor economic policy decision is designed and aimed at our people, to harm our people, our constituency. So both parties, in their turn, claim to represent all Guyanese, but the contrary, the converse also applies, that both parties attack the other party and accuse the other party of directing venom, directing harm at the people who are seen as not their constituency, as our people. So the division exists, and the division is not recognized in our policy because we are for all the people. But you, the other side, are attacking our constituency, and you, the other side, have policies which polarize and which are divisive and which harm half of the country. So both sides in turn adopt the identical spiel, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And when you say that APNU, PNC, whatever you want to call them, need to see that they need to reinvent themselves, again, I have to point out that the other reality of our politics, the corollary to what we're talking about, which is the blind ethnic party support, they don't have to reinvent one thing. Because if we have elections tomorrow, the split in the vote will be between 5 and 10,000 if it's only a two-party race. The APNU have lost no support, little or no support, by what has happened. And just as after many years of corruption, the PPP had lost little or no support as at 2015. It is nuances and slight nudges because the vast majority is blind ethnic party loyalty. And we can't move away from that.
Well, you see, the changes, though, excuse me, Vishnu, because this is a very important point, and that's what I want to make, is that while all parties have a historical baggage, and it's inevitable, the social science has the term for it, hysteresis, I think, which is a lag between your ideology or your belief system and the ground reality. But this is where the parties are going to do themselves a disservice if they do not adapt to this new reality. And what is this new reality? In the past, when we started out our modern drive into politics in the 60s, Indians had a majority, an absolute majority in the country. So through the democratic rules, the PPP could always talk about democracy, but they knew that they would win the election. So this is why there's a critique going on about Dr. Chetty Jagan right now. So when he talked about Marxism and his supporters loved his Marxist position and all that, all of us know that that was, so much, pulling people wool over people's eyes. It was an ethnic vote, and he could be very comfortable with that. Mr. Burnham, on the other hand, he also knew he couldn't amass that kind of vote, and he went in a particular direction to rig elections. And he was excused for that because if everybody voted ethnically, which you're saying they still are, then what changes? Well, what has changed is the demographics of Guyana. We are in a situation now where no ethnic group forms an absolute majority. Indians are the last census as of 2012. Indo-Guyanese at that point was 39.9 or something, or 0.8. They're probably down to 35%. African Guyanese was 29%. The mixed and the Amerindian proportion are both growing. They're the only two. So we have a new Guyana. And we saw that the PNC, in a coalition, they were big enough to accept that they need Indian votes, which is a big concession. It was something I pushed for publicly in 2009, 2010 for, that if the PNC were to accept the numbers that were out there and be more accommodative to crossover votes, they could probably win an election. At that point, I remember, and it's in the press, where Lincoln Lewis and people like Eric Phillips and others took me on to say how it will never happen. Indians will never stop voting for the PPP. Well, enough did via the AFC, and you had a change of government. And my position is right now that demographic change is intensifying in terms of a less of a majority in each major side. So the point is, and this is where Burke and others are doing a disservice to the PNC. If the PNC once again is identified as a total African party, which I think Roger Ford would say, then you're saying it must become tribal, then they will never win a fair and fair election in Guyana. They are doing the work for the PPP to push Indians under the tent of the PPP. And that is where I think we need to focus on people like Burke and Duncan and others out there who are pushing the PNC in a particular direction, which I don't think is good for Guyana. I think we need an opposition in a democracy, and I think the PNC, with its base, is the core of that opposition, and I think we need that opposition to understand that it needs to moderate its language, its posture, its program, so that it can present that face to Guyana. And I think we can have governments changing in Guyana every other election.
You raise a very interesting point, and I agree with you. The demographic is changing, and it is really the only hope that Guyana politics has. I agree with you entirely on that. I don't think we can run away from the fact that the Indo-Guyanese community does still outnumber the Afro-Guyanese, so that they have a head start in the race. They got arch in the race. And that means we don't have an exactly perfect democratic system. But I do agree with you that as that evolves, if we could have rational discourse, the system could be better. And as you said, for the first time in 2015, APNU has won a fair election.
Right.
Now, Where that goes, I think we can't simplify the view of the voter. The voter, many of them, might be willing to say, I don't like what my party is doing, because every Guyanese identifies, when I say every Guyanese, 95% of the voters identify with the party.
That's right.
Whether they're mixed or not. And they may say, I don't like what my party is doing. But many of them who will quietly criticize what their party is doing would never vote for the other party.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I'm afraid you and I part company. Because to talk about the government changing every election is to suggest that your average Guyanese voter may vote PPP this go round, but being disillusioned with the PPP will vote APNU next go round. And I think that is tilting at windmills. Your average voter might say, I'm staying home if he's independent-minded enough. Most are not. But let's talk about the 10% so-called independent. The 10% so-called independent voter who happens to be more middle class, maybe mixed, maybe younger, maybe professional, maybe educated. That voter has his home base, but he may be willing to say, I'll vote for a neutral third party or I will not vote. But there are very few Guyanese who will go and vote for those people over there.
I
And
agree.
that's what we have to consider as well.
But what I can tell you this, though, Jonas, is that I live in Iflat. I'm in the countryside. I live in a village. Iflat is a mixed village. You can meet both races, and I deal at the level of the marketplace and very rural. And this is where the heart of the PPP support is. So what I can tell you is this, and when I was in active politics, I found the same thing. There is that the best campaigners for the PPP are these extreme elements in the PNC. I can tell you that. And you must remember that when I was in Parliament, I was an opposition party. I sat with the PNC for 5 years on the PNC side of the bench, and the PPP were, opposite me. And that was my reality. So I dealt very intimately with the opposition party, especially Mr. Corbyn, Mr. Hoyt, and all of the rest of them. Most of them are now moved on, but I think I do understand that element. And this is, again, I come back to this point that we are at a critical juncture. In the beginning, after my first term, when I went out to campaign in 2006, I saw two developments in the community. When I went out, I coalesced with GAP and went out there, and we campaigned. And the two changes were, one, the loss of the PPP's absolute majority. By 2011, it was very, very clear to me. And that is when I started to argue that the PNC were to moderate its approach. And I'm so happy that Mr. Corbyn, he himself committed Harikiri on himself and asked Mr. Granger to come aboard. He was seen as a moderate. And they won that election. It was 2011 was really a win. It's just that they didn't coalesce with the AFC. The point I want to say is that tendency is not going to go back. Once that genie is out of the bottle, once you have voted against your party, it's very difficult to go back in. First of all, you're not allowed to by the major two groups. It took 30 years for a David Hines to try to redeem a Forbes Burnham. You understand? It took 30 years. The PAP doesn't have that. What I'm saying to you, I'm going by hard surveys on the ground, that inbuilt support for the PPP is not there. And if it were not for the PNCs, and this is the danger, that if you have people like Burke and company, and even some of the others out there on the social media, if they were to continue, then yes, the PPP will get back in. But not because Indians are now reflexively going to vote for PPP. You're having people out there who are beginning to look at their interests. and they're looking as to what's going to happen in this new economy. What is in it for Guyana? I'll tell you the biggest concern I face from people in the marketplace. I went to Parika Market, and you walk around and you talk with people and all that. There is a great concern among the PPP's constituency that these so-called white people will come in, and pretty soon African Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese will continue fighting each other. And I see Mr. Shuman is out now there. The Americans will remain there back in the forest, and these white people will then take over because of while we are fighting, each other. There's a great concern. So they're not just people who aren't looking strategically ahead. And again, a lot depends on what kind of PNC emerges out of their elections.
Gentlemen, I want to go for a break in a couple of minutes. And before I do that, let me welcome Mr. Shuman, leader of the Liberty and Justice Party, Deputy Speaker of the House. I do also want to clarify, as Timothy Jonas correctly pointed out, that Sherrod Duncan is not a member of APNU, unless he recently migrated from AFC to APNU. Yes, he was AFC. And as for Rickford Burke, he doesn't live in Guyana. I can't say whether he's a member of APNU, but he does support publicly in his various programs the APNU. So, Mr. Shuman, welcome back. I just got 2 quick minutes. You wanna reflect on any of on those comments uttered by either one or both of the gentlemen?
Well, folks, let me say good evening and my apologies for being late. I was actually engaged in another discussion that parallels some of the very same topics that were meant to be discussed tonight. And those, I will say, in terms of the comments that are being made by Rickford Burke, I don't agree with them. I don't think that the opposition, I wouldn't say opposition because I'm part of the opposition. We, Tim and I and TNM, we're part of the opposition, but I will say the majority of the opposition, the APNU AFC component in themselves, I think they're a listless ship right now. And until they can find a way to address the issues of the PNC's Congress, there is nothing that they can say or do that will have any impact on how the PPP governs.
Okay, so thank you. It's almost a break time, so we'll just take a break and we'll come back and then I'll talk about an issue that Mr. Dev brought up before, and also play a short clipping as well. This wanted bulletin. So, gentlemen, let's go for a break and we'll be right back.
This is a Save the Date announcement. Couples, family, relatives, and friends, save the date. We are taking our culture, music, and food on our vacation in 2022. Enjoy a vacation plus special events and entertainments. Here are the choices. Guyana excursion May 4th to May 11th. Indian talent competition July 14th to July 18th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Christian Community Week July 21st to July 25th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Curry Duck Curry Competition, July 28th to August 1st in Cancun, Mexico. Caribbean Week, August 4th to August 8th in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Battle for the DJ Crown, Soca, Indo, and Chutney Style, August 11th to August 15th. Enjoy 5 days plus 4 nights, all-inclusive vacation with your own cultural music, food, and entertainment. Meet and greet sessions with the performers and competition prizes. First place prize $2,000, second place $1,500, and third place $1,000. This is a Save the Date announcement by TravelSpan. More information will become available in December. TravelSpan, always on the cutting edge and serving you for over 27 years. Call 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. It's the gifting time of the year, and send your loved one a special gift. Choose from these special gift boxes. Select a 4-meal box as a gift or one of our preset boxes, such as the duck and roti box or a doubles box. We also sell pastry gift boxes and roti gift boxes as well, and much more on allfromOneSupplier.com. There's a gift box for everyone, even GT boxes and TNT boxes. Select your gift box and let us ship to your loved ones today. Log on to allforonesupplier.com. Globespan 24x7 continues its efforts to serve the communities. The platform provides for all sides to air their views and discuss solutions. Viewers in Guyana and across the world are participating in these discussions. Globespan's platform offers Guyanese an opportunity to express their concerns and discuss solutions in the political realm, thereby addressing the polarized situation. Discussions also include social ills, such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicides that have been plaguing the people. The Globespan 24x7 platform connects the diaspora and the world with Guyana. So become a supporter of Globespan 24x7 today by clicking the badge icon on the lower right side of your screen. For only $10 a month, you will be a supporter of Globespan 24x7 initiative and have a badge displayed on your Facebook profile. Help us to continue to serve the communities.
Welcome back, viewers, listeners, to Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with Devin Bissoon as our techie operator. We are discussing current issues here tonight, and with us are Senior Counsel Timothy Jonas, a former Member of Parliament Mr. Ravi Dev, Deputy Speaker of Parliament today, Mr. Lenox Shuman, who is also leader of the LJP. Welcome again, gentlemen. We had a break, and before the break, I wanted to get into this response to Mr. Burke's statement, very, very controversial statement, insightful statement. And Mr. Ravi Dev had talked about a wanted bulletin being issued by the Guyana police. So I'm just going to play a clipping to Mr. Burke's response to this wanted bulletin and then get your views.
New York-based Guyanese political activist Rickford Burke has rubbished a recent wanted bulletin issued for his arrest by the police, and he is accusing the government of now using the police force to go after its political opponents and critics. A wanted bulletin was issued for Burke's arrest by the Guyana police force on Friday evening, one day after Burke's attorney launched a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Vice President Bara Jagdeo for statements that Jagdeo made against the activist. In a statement on Sunday, Rickford Burke said the bulletin for his arrest is unlawful, and the police force has now found itself being used for political revenge against those who condemn the government and its failures. He said he's not moved by the wanted bulletin and has informed the New York Police Department and the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigations of threats being made to his life since the bulletin was issued. In recent weeks, the political activist has accused the government of being racist and taking actions to harm the Afro-Guyanese community. The government has not officially responded to the claims. The Guyana police force issued a wanted bulletin seeking his arrest for a number of offenses that contravenes Guyana's cybercrime legislation, according to the police. The alleged offenses are reportedly in relation to recent online talk show appearances and interviews given by Burke.
So, gentlemen, I don't know if there was actually a lawsuit filed by Burke against Bara Jagdeo, and if it was, where it was filed, I don't know. He's just making this claim, and so what I want to ask is, what do you make of his statement of Burke? So let's begin with Timothy Jonas being the lawyer in Guyana.
Which statements are we talking about?
The second one, his response to this wanted bulletin.
Okay. Let's talk about wanted bulletins, and let's talk about government control of police. After 2015, we saw Ashni Singh in handcuffs and Winston Brassington in handcuffs. We saw Irfan Ali taken before the police and charged with 19 charges and Nandalal charged. We saw Bara Jagdeo himself taken into the station and all of that. And then when the government changed, suddenly the charges against Irfan Ali were withdrawn. Suddenly the charges against Nandalal, even though a magistrate said they had been proved and he needed to lead his defense, were inexcusably withdrawn. And then suddenly the APNU folks start getting arrested and taken into the same so-called headquarters. So we see Winston Jordan taken in there, arrested. Now, is there anyone in Guyana who doubts government control of the police? Is there anyone who is going to look at that and say, police are acting independently and professionally? We have the beginnings of a monster going on here, and all of us need to be worried about it. So take that and then go to an arrest warrant. The arrest warrant is timed perfectly for political reasons. But when do you issue an arrest warrant? You issue an arrest warrant when someone has committed an offense and you try to serve a summons on them to come to magistrate's court to answer the offense. You can't find them. And you go to a magistrate and you say to a magistrate, please give a warrant to arrest this person. And you show the magistrate the evidence you have, and the magistrate uses his or her discretion to say, yes, you have a warrant to arrest this person. And then when you can't find the person, you put up the arrest warrant. I challenge the police, and I'm speaking from a position I do not know, so I may be proved wrong, but I challenge them to produce to the public a warrant signed by a magistrate in Guyana, having been issued on evidence presented by the police that justifies an arrest warrant being issued for Burke. If that is shown, I will apologize on your program. But we have so often seen arrests being made unlawfully, without a warrant, without just cause, and we have so often seen the politicization of what should be a professional police force that we need to think about it. I'll tell you something. If I have been a victim of oppression, if wrong has been done to me, it is doubly wrong, doubly sinful, doubly egregious when I get into power for me to perpetrate that same wrong on someone else. And that is what we are seeing. We are seeing people who were dragged into the police station, who were arrested wrongly, who were charged, who were put through the walk of shame. Now they're in power and they're doing it to the other side. Instead of showing leadership and saying this wrong must never happen again, I will take responsibility to allow the police force to operate independently and professionally. I will be the person who, having suffered that oppression, will ensure that I now use my position of power to mandate that no one else must be oppressed for political reasons because of political interference. We're not seeing that. We're seeing an eye for an eye. And for all of those rabble-rousers, all of those party loyalists who are gleefully, triumphantly saying, Winston Jordan gets in what our side used to get long ago, I have to ask you, is your ambition for Guyana, is what you want for Guyana, leadership by the kind of people who succumb to that eye for an eye politics where you know something is wrong because it was done to you, and yet you are happily doing it to someone else out of a feeling of revenge, out of a feeling of getting your own back? Is that the leadership you want? Because that is the leadership you are seeing.
Ravi Dev?
I thought you were going to give Mr. Shuman a chance. The poor man didn't get a chance to utter a word yet. So
you see, you're a lawyer, you know, so I don't think Mr. Shuman is a lawyer.
Well, that's not neither here nor there. The man is a parliamentarian. That means he knows everything. Anyhow, let me get to your question. One, I noticed that the police were very careful to define what they issued. They call it a wanted publication. They said a wanted publication is hereby being issued. Blah, blah, blah. And what they did, they quoted 7 different offenses. And they have now then they didn't state as to the facts as to what Mr. Burke did. Each of those instances, for example, accepting now, leaving us to surmise, for example, the at common law. seditious libel at the criminal law 801, offense inciting the provocation of a breach of the peace. So they've gone through those things. So they have these elements of law. They're saying Burke violated them. So with that as a background, I think then you have a case where Mr. Burke, in saying that until somebody get run off the road or something, that is the one we are surmised. That's one of the statements he made. Just to compensate the things that you're doing, they're going to keep doing it, meaning that they're now going after the PPP to overthrow the PPP. Now, I noticed the police or whoever issued the statement still used the word sedition from the cybercrime law, but that word sedition was removed after protests by the citizenry and the PPP, as a matter of fact, and it was changed, later changed to offense against the state or some such thing. Be as it may, I think in the case of Burke, and I'm not talking about Mr. Jordan at this point, I'm talking about the case of Burke. I would like to feel that there is some justification, and as I said before, with social media allowing this unmediated appeal directly to the people. We're talking of these guys talking to thousands of people, and to be able to use this kind of language, I would like to feel, and so many countries are now enacting cybercrime laws, we have to begin to deal with it. As to how it's dealt with, then that is now a matter for us, the parliament, the citizenry, and the politicians, not to use a shield as a sword. And it's going to be tricky, but we have to begin to look at it that way. And in fact, all of these concerns were raised when the cybercrime law was being enacted. So it's nothing new that I'm saying here. So in this case, I think that they are, as a lay person in this case here, not having access to all the facts, but with the one clip you showed us earlier, I think that there are grounds there for having Mr. Burke be questioned at the minimum as to what he intended or what the import of his statement, and the legal, hawks can look at it. So I'll just address that. I'm not going to go to the Jordan case because you didn't ask about that.
Yeah, Mr. Shuman.
I have to throw my weight 100% behind Tim's statements. I think what we have seen continuously and consistently is the weaponization of the police force in Guyana. And all Guyanese, regardless of your color or creed, should be equally disturbed as you were under APNU, AFC administration. You should be equally disturbed under the PPP's administration. It is only a matter of time before the police starts to come for myself and Tim, and maybe some other people who disagree with the government at some point. And they will find they do have creative and inventive ways of going about silencing political dissent. I really fear for the future of Guyana. What Rickford Burke said in itself, I really detest it. I think it is distasteful, and it has no place in a Guyanese society per se. When you're asking for people to go and remove the wheels off of cars, police cars, and not permitting them access and all these things, I mean, I don't think that we have a place in society for that, or in any future Guyana for that. But I think what one needs to look at even deeper than that are why or what are the reasons for someone to call for such action. I don't have the answers. I'll be very forward in saying that. I really have not watched their programs and understood a lot of things, but I will tell you from where I sit within the Guyanese context that there are a lot of issues that are not being addressed in Guyana. Issues of equity, and when I say equity, I mean equitable opportunities for all Guyanese. I see it and I hear it every single day. Now, if we cannot have equitable access to a variety of things, not only investment opportunities, but opportunities to be able to benefit from what is Guyana, all of the bounties that are in Guyana, then we have to find an outlet for that. And I would anticipate, and I'm guessing here that maybe that is the direction that Burke may have tended to. I'm not defending him, I'm simply speculating at this point. What I completely and absolutely disagree is the weaponization of the police force and the weaponization or the perceived weaponization of the judiciary as is being executed through the Department of Public Prosecution. I think we have to look at that. Do we live in a society, or are we anticipating living in a society where justice truly prevails? If you go back to the cybercrime bill, remember that under the previous proposed bill under APNO AFC administration, that simply the matter of being critical of the government was defined as sedition. Now, what they've done is remove that, so there's a bit broader scope that you can criticize the government. But while it was removed from the text, we know that the action in itself, when exercised by Guyanese, is still being seen as seditious. So we have to be careful about how we straddle that line in what one can do without being or becoming a victim of a newly weaponized judiciary, potential judiciary. I'm not saying that it is, but the perception is there, or weaponized police force in itself. I think those are some very tricky lines that we need to be very cautious in how we look at those things. And obviously, if the government starts to use them as we are looking at, and we've seen that APNO AFC did, as Tim rightfully pointed out, and Irfan Ali, Ashley Singh, and all of them were paraded through the halls. Now the shoe is on the next foot. The proverbial shoe is on the next foot. And we see that the MO for this administration is the same as the previous. I think it does not set a good tone. And where I say through my voice of support behind what Tim said 100%, is that if I am expected to live in a just society, then I would not want for the injustices that have been perpetrated against me for anyone else to come under that. That is the only measure upon which we could look forward and say that we are in a society that doles out justice instead of revenge.
I would like to touch on some other issue, but I just want to get your reaction, Ravi, in particular. Rickford Burke says he covers behind freedom of speech. Does he have freedom of speech to use that kind of language?
I'm sorry, I think you broke up there for a minute.
Burke says freedom of speech, no one can touch him. No wanted bulletin can work.
Please permit me, Vishnu. Freedom of speech comes with context, right? Freedom of speech does not, if I come and say, you know what, Vishnu, I'm going to harm you, then there is a law, and I'm sitting with eminently qualified lawyers on the other side here, where it says that issuing a threat is an offense. So freedom of speech does have limitations, even from a legislative perspective. So we have to be able to contextualize what freedom of speech really defines. You're not permitted hate speech. That in itself is confined because it infringes on other rights. You're not permitted to threaten anyone. You're not permitted to threaten terrorism. Even hopping on an airplane, I could say that I could have freedom of speech and say that I'm talking about, there's a word you never use in an airport or an airplane, which is bomb. Now, I could say I'm simply speaking in a militaristic or a military terminology about what I've experienced, but the fact that you have mentioned that in the confines of an airport or an airplane, that in itself does not give you the latitude for freedom of speech. Those are actually the issuance of threats. So we have to be careful, in terms of saying freedom of speech, and it does come with its limitations. And we've had a parliamentary session on it, and we are going to have another one, I think, with the IPU Inter-Parliamentary Unit on those very same things.
All right, so there are two other issues I want to discuss. I know you. Go ahead.
But
Ravi.
let me answer directly the question to me. And yes, I think Lennox made the point that no right is absolute, and the old saw was that you don't yell fire in a crowded theater. There's limitations to what you could say. But I think I just want to say to my fellow panelists here, the question that we were addressing was Burke's speech over social media that was incendiary. And what I posited when I started my remarks was that this is something new that we are seeing. And I think as both of you are politicians, younger politicians, you will be living with this. Social media gives individuals unmediated access to their audiences. So as I said, what Burke and Sherrod were doing is something that will intensify. Across the world, people are, jurisdictions are constructing cybercrime laws. And part of it will be to deal with such incitement and other dangers from that. So rather than going off a tangent and talking about justice and weaponizing of the judiciary and the police not professionalized, all of us know that. We've been living here. That's how I entered politics, about the police not being professionalized back in 1998 when they stood around seeing hundreds of people were beaten in the streets of Georgetown. Let's not go down that road. We're talking of a specific, and we have to, again, address these one by one. So in the case of Burke, let's not bring in Mr. Jordan and having to do the Burke walk and what have you. We're talking about Burke here. Nobody has ever mentioned the word Jordan at this junction. We're talking about Burke and the what he said and the import of that and the police's reaction to it in issuing what they call a wanted publication. So with that in mind, yes, I agree with Lenox that in this particular instance, and we have to stick to particulars, and as Timothy knows, in law, that's how the law will develop. And if we want to live under the rule of law, we have to, on one by one, the case law will determine it. And then you will have precedents that no man, you can't be using this or you can't be using that. But let's not go all over the place. I think this is an important case here. What can you actually say over social media? Because it's going to increase.
Okay, so I just want to spend a few minutes discussing this coming weekend is the PNC's internal election for executive. Wonder if any of you have your opinion. What do you think will be the outcome of the election, if indeed it's being held Saturday, or whether it's be postponed or not? I don't know. Lenox, you being an opposition politician, what's your view?
Is it fair to say that I don't have a view?
If that's your position, I don't see any
No,
argument.
I say that in
It's
jest.
a cop out.
I strongly believe that that without the PNC completing that process, that the opposition will be in continuous disarray. It is my sincere hope that they get their act together. If they cannot get their act together, that the PPP will continue to run roughshod over parliamentary processes. And it is my hope that whoever the victor is in that process, that they have the full endorsement of their party, and that they find a way to reinvent the PNC per se. It cannot be the old Burnhamites or the Grangers or whoever it is. I think that they need a reinvention. They need someone who has a vision for not only a party, but for a country. Whoever that person is, I hope that they come with a clean slate, that no one can go and say that they've taken bribes or they've been corrupt or anything of that sort, because that has been one of the issues that has eroded the public's confidence in continuous opposition. It's they play the blame game. You've done this when you were in office, and I think that both sides, within the old PNC and the PPP in themselves, they've got dirt on each other, so they can only speak to a certain point. I hope that whoever comes does not have that kind of baggage with them. And it gives them a lot more latitude to now be able to call the administration out on a variety of things. But I hope that whatever they do, they execute it very, very quickly, very fairly, and that we find within that opposition the kind of force that pretty much puts the PPP on heels.
Well, let's go to another current politician, Timothy Jonas. What's your view for this weekend's PNC internal elections?
It's funny, when you look at the internal wranglings in the APNU or in PPP, that's where you see democracy really at work, and you see a genuine fight among individuals without the race card, relying on policies to try to get people to vote for them, and the negotiation and the talks and the behind the scenes dealing and wheeling that really should be happening in a larger context. So I don't think that the outcome matters, because if Daffy Duck ran APNU and Bugs Bunny ran PPP, the votes would be the same. But I think that it is a necessary aspect of what needs to be done. And at the end of it, and here I'm afraid I don't agree with Lenox, at the end of it, APNU is a minority in parliament and therefore has no say. They will make a lot of noise, they will kick and scream, and the PPP will use their majority to push whatever legislation they want. Hopefully next elections that will change and we will have a minority government. But it is a necessary part of the process, because the two behemoths will continue to dominate the political landscape until a third party carries a swing.
Earlier elections were questionable. There's the allegation of fraud. What do you think is going to happen this Friday? Do you think it'll be free and fair? Timothy and then Ravi Dev.
Well, okay.
I've never appeared, I've never seen it, so I can't comment on that at all.
Okay.
But it is a fight among equals.
Ravi
Well,
Dev?
let me take your question first of all, Vishnu. I had said earlier, and Lenox agrees, that the PNC will have to reinvent itself. When Mr. Hoyt was catapulted after Mr. Burnham's untimely death, he was not seen as the front runner, and he basically degutted the PNC and reinvented it by banishing all of the Burnhamites, starting from Viola to Hamilton Green to McDavid and all of them. So he pretty much degutted the old PNC of Mr. Burnham. When Mr. Corbyn took over, again after Mr. Hoyt's untimely death, and I must say I spent a tremendous amount of time talking with Mr. Hoyt. He was a politician who liked to discuss, and I think he was I know he was an intellectual, and he enjoyed discussing things and splitting them apart. So he knew what he was trying to do. When Mr. Corbyn came aboard, he also, and I don't think he's given enough credit for understanding his own role and his own place within the political context. And we have to give him a tremendous amount of credit that by 2010, he decided that whatever baggage he had brought would not be able to give the PNC the momentum across their own constituency. And he moved over for Mr. Granger, and it was a successful move. Mr. Granger, however, even though he and Mr. Hoyt were never at odds, because he was one of the individuals who Mr. Hoyt degutted. He was a Burnhamite, but he did exactly what Mr. Hoyt did. He degutted the PNC that he got and put in a whole bunch of newbies who are now beholden to him. And so whoever is elected at this coming Congress will have to deal with that. What is their vision of the party? But more importantly, what is their vision of that party within Guyana? As I said earlier, just like how the media has a logic, there's something called political logic. And political logic within a democracy means you have to agglomerate votes. So I am posing this, that which of those three individuals running for it understands, as I said earlier, the demographics of Guyana have changed. And there's an opportunity that the PNC can win an election just as it did in 2015 by adopting particular postures, what strategy it will use. I think Mr. Granger shot the PNC in the foot by doing what it did, closing sugar estates, even though the COI itself hadn't recommended that. And yeah, and the PNC has nobody to blame. And Mr. Corbyn's sacrifice was all in vain. Be as it may, I think it's a very crucial election. And I'm hoping that the extremists on social media do not push them in extreme positions. I happen to know Aubrey. He was, even though Mr. Hoyt had kicked him out, describing him as a creature. And I'll share this anecdote. Mr. Hoyt, I asked him, why did you throw out Aubrey? And imagine this, whether in jest or not, Mr. Hoyt said he was driving along somewhere in Georgetown, and he saw Aubrey at the street corner having beers with his people, with some young people, and he had his shirt out of his pants. That, to Mr. Hoyt, was a fatal, fatal, fatal mistake. So Mr. Hoyt saw a PNC leader, I guess in a particular mold. He was of that generation. But very seriously, I think Aubrey Norton is a leader with grassroots support. I think he's original PNC, and he understands how the party works, and he understands, I think, ethnic politics. Mr. Harmon comes out not party, not but the PNC. Mr. Burnham said clearly that he expects them to support the party. Them into the party. Something new. They'll have to decide that. He's the third contestant. I don't think he has been away too long. Where I think basically that I don't think he has struck that critical mass in the support base. So I think it's a fight between Aubrey Norton and Joe Harmon. I think one of them has the institutional advantage and one of them has the popular advantage. And I would hope that the PNC is mature enough to pick one of them that would understand that there need to be a posture to agglomerate votes across the spectrum.
Okay, and that pretty much echoes the point that Timothy, and as well as Lenox Shuman, is saying, that they need to get a house in order because there is need for an effective opposition. I just want to move on now to another issue. This matter that Timothy, I'm sorry, that Lenox Shuman himself had brought up, this Monk Marudi indigenous land issue. Lenox, you want to clarify what that is about? You want to explain to us what it is about? We are not hearing you.
My apologies. I said to paraphrase. It's an issue that goes back a few centuries. The Wapishana Nation have lived in southern Guyana for a few thousand years. And there are international treaties and laws that recognize the rightful owners of lands as indigenous peoples, or maybe the converse per se, right? That the indigenous peoples have the right to the territories and lands that they have traditionally owned, used, and occupied. And that has been the case in much of Guyana. If you recall to the independence agreement, is that part of that, or the conditionality upon us gaining independence, was for the government of Guyana to respect indigenous lands. In the Lands Commission report of 1967, which was published in 1969, I think it said that indigenous peoples owned over 50%, over 50%. Can't remember the exact number of percentage of Guyana. Now, that included a lot of these very contentious areas where government seems to think that they've got free reign over. And those lands have never, let's say the independence agreement in itself was never respected. Thus, a lot of indigenous peoples are still fighting for their lands. Marudi happens to be within Wapishiana, traditional Wapishiana territory, and the government simply failed to recognize that as part of their territory. It has a lot of cultural value to them, a lot of traditional values to them. It also sits at one of the nexus of the headwaters of the Rupununi River, upon which many indigenous communities depend on for their livelihood, not only for hunting in Marudi, but also fishing on the water source, the main river as a water source. And the government has not done, which is a legal requirement, an EIA or an ESIA, on the impact of mining in that area. So it's pretty much a long line of issues, from ownership to the government not following the laws before they grant mining permits. If you remember, Article 13 of the Constitution talks about the government making decisions with the voice of the people, whose lives those decisions will impact, right? There is actually an organization that has been established called Article 13, and that formulates part of what has not happened in the Marudi area. The government has not consulted the rightful owners of the land, and they have simply given people mining permits to undertake mining without compliance to the laws. And that poses a very massive issue, not only for the immediate communities in that area, but every community downstream from that. If you look at just take a look at what happens up at the Cuyuni, Mazaruni rivers, right? Basically, where people would have traditionally fished and drank waters from those rivers, they can't do it anymore. If you go up to Kamrang, you will see a very, very distinguished difference in the water that comes from the Kamrang and the Mazaruni rivers. These are very, very dangerous, and I'd say when I say dangerous, I'm talking to the indigenous people's way of life, which is also guaranteed under the Constitution of Guyana. Article 149G of the Constitution talks about it. So it infringes on our right to the protection and preservation of our way of life. So the government simply gave these miners an opportunity to run roughshod, not only over the laws of Guyana, but over the Constitution and the people's rights that own the area.
You have any comment on that, Mr. Dev? I know you have to leave shortly.
Well, let me first of all say that I'm very strong. I was in Parliament, I think it was in 2006, when the new Amerindian Act was passed, and I'm a very, very strong supporter of indigenous people's right to the land. As Lenox said, I think it was Appendix C to the Constitution, which was negotiated by Mr. Campbell in 1965, enshrines that as part of our Constitution, the very document that gave us our independence. So let's start from there. Now, in terms of implementing that, while the PNC did dilly-dally, there was a process that was untitling that took place. I remember somebody I knew, Anna Correa, was in charge of that through the UNDP for a while. Now, there was a case I remember reading a few years back in which Ian Chang decided in terms of how is the land going to be demarcated. I can't remember all of the details, but what I do know that the word occupying it from time immemorial was given a legal meaning, not necessarily literal meaning that they had to be there, forever from the creation. There was that literal meaning, but there was also a process that if the people who occupied the land did not agree with the demarcation of their land, there was a process whereby they can make application, and it became a question of fact where they would have to prove that they did occupy it or they did use it, or there was there's these criteria that would have to be kept. Maybe Timothy might know of this case by Chan. I think it was pretty thorough because it came after Mabo in Australia, which finally gave indigenous people, the right and acknowledging that they were living there, as if it was not terra nullius. So to come back to the thing, I have a question for Lenox. Did the village next to Marudi or adjoining Marudi, did they claim it through this process that was outlined legally? Did they seek to incorporate it within our tribal land?
They have been continuously fighting for the very same recognition that the government now claims. You have to remember, in the previous Amerindian Act, basically there are a lot of Amerindian communities that were titled just by virtue of it being part of the act. In 1992, Desmond Hoyt began to use it as a political tool where these communities now have to show pretty much a receipt as you would walk into a store and purchase a shirt. Here's a receipt for your land to show that you legally own it. And what the PPP did with the 2006 Act was develop some arbitrary criteria in what people are permitted to do, right? You've got a population of 150, you would have to prove that you've lived there. Now, how does one begin to prove that you would have lived somewhere when the language in itself in many communities were not Romanized until the late 1970s? And not only that, you have to remember that the soils in many of these communities in themselves are very acidic. So you would not be able to find human remains in many of them, save for the Barbese Mongs, which the government really took away, which were the first evidence of Arawak civilization in this country. So how now do you go and prove when the soil in itself does not support that? You can't find the kind of pottery because we're never potters in that sense, right? Hunters, gatherers, and all that stuff. So in terms of the Marudi case, there are petroglyphs on those rocks that speak to the Wapashiana civilization in that area for thousands of years.
Now, the question, Lennox, if I might interrupt, did they actually legally? Did they file a claim?
Absolutely. But what I'm getting at, Ravi, is that the law now put forth a series of arbitrary conditionalities upon which indigenous peoples now have to go and execute a process that they didn't understand to get land that they have traditionally owned. Now, because of that process, the Wapashiana Nation of South Rupununi have to apply for something that is called an extension to their land, whereby they would have traditionally owned this land. Now the government simply took it away and said, no, if you want this land, you have to apply for it, which is counter to a lot of international conventions. So they did apply for it. And not only one,
as an extension.
Not only one community, a multitude of communities, yeah.
Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left. In fact, we're running very, very late. Let's get final comments. Tim, anything on that or on final comments? Tim, we're not hearing you.
It's a difficult subject, and I want to point out why it's so difficult. You're a hunter-gatherer. You've been that way for hundreds of years, thousands of years. You do not have a written history. You don't have an archive. You don't have somewhere where you store your public records. You also don't have the same concept of ownership of land, because each of us in this forum may have a house lot where we've lived for our entire lives that we hope that we will pass on to our children, that we own. This is our corner of the earth. But that concept is a very Western and recent concept. And for a culture that may be nomadic, that may come here summertime, go there dry season, come back later on, that may follow game and follow fishing, that may farm here only temporarily and then move on because the soil peters out very quickly. And even the farming is very small and rudimentary because mainly you are hunter-gatherers. That concept of ownership in a permanent way doesn't exist. And what has happened and what doesn't work is that when the authority comes with their Western preconceived notions to say, we will introduce our system of laws and try to fit it so that a piece of paper title applies to a piece of land, and you are entitled to get a paper title, but you have to show some qualifications which don't even resonate with you. But there are qualifications which we are accustomed to dealing with. Time immemorial. Time immemorial means since 1185. That's what it means. It is an English concept that has come up that goes back to William of Orange. What Amerindian and Guyana knows about that? So even the language, even the talk of title, we are trying to fit something round into a square hole. And we can't do justice that way. More than that, you cannot go into a village, and if anyone's gone into the villages, have spoken to the indigenous people in the interior, how can you reasonably tell them about filing some piece of paper in town and making some application to conform to the rigors of a piece of legislation that will make anybody's eyes glaze over, just so that they can vindicate what they want to do, which is hunt, fish, live in an area that they know, that they were born in, that their parents know? How can you tell them to go to town to file papers to do this, and that they lose rights if they don't? And even worse, how can you knowingly give mining claims out and allow people to go and destroy habitat and destroy territory? And we've seen it, I've seen it, where the water changes color in the river, and people who are living off the land can no longer live off the land. That is immoral, and that is what's happening. And it needs to change, and there needs to be a discussion about it. The solution cannot be what we are seeing, that you just turn a blind eye because you need to make $1 profit.
Final point, Ravi.
Well, I would want to be make a very strong statement about this, that these lands were our indigenous people's lands, and through force and conquest, they were taken away, and law became positive. Whatever the ruler said became the law, very arbitrary. But of recent, as I indicated, through this Australian case called Marvel, also in South Africa, in Canada, to accommodate the point of view that we are hearing about, which is that we have different customs, we have different notions, different civilizational ethos. Ownership, I mean, that's the most classic one, so we don't have to rehash that. And I would hope that coming back to case law in Guyana, after Ian Chang's decision in that case, that this continues ill. If this was brought into the courts, and this is where society, all of us, will have to get an understanding of this, and to have this nuanced approach, I think is very necessary, because this is only one very small segment of what trying to accept what the Western quote-unquote civilization did to us. It was not only to indigenous people. We're seeing the cracks are showing in terms of people of African origin who were dragged here as slaves, people of Indian origin who was dragged